Welcome friends. In this session, we will be studying about performance management, how different it is from performance appraisal and the factors that distort appraisal. Let us start with understanding what performance management exactly is. Performance management can be defined as a systematic process for improving organizational performance by developing the performance of individuals and teams. It is a means of providing better results from the organization, teams and individuals by understanding and managing performance within an agreed framework of planned goals, standards and competence requirements. There are two very famous definitions of performance management. The definition given by Lockett says, performance management is the development of individuals with competence and commitment working towards the achievement of shared meaningful objectives within an organization, which supports and encourages their achievement. The definition given by Armstrong and Barron says, performance management is a strategic and integrated approach delivering sustained success to organization by improving the performance of the people who work in them and by developing the capabilities of teams and individual contributors. Performance appraisal versus performance management. It is sometimes assumed that performance management and performance appraisal is the same. However, there are significant differences. What is performance appraisal? Performance appraisal can be defined as the formal assessment and rating of individuals by their managers at usually an annual review meeting. Performance appraisal operates on a top-down approach and is largely a bureaucratic system owned by the HR department rather than by line managers. It is believed to be backward-looking, concentrating on what had gone wrong rather than looking forward to future development needs. Performance appraisal is an ongoing process of evaluating employee performance. Performance appraisals are reviews of employee performance over time, so appraisal is just one piece of performance management. And what is performance management? In contrast to performance appraisal, performance management is a continuous and much wider, more comprehensive and more natural process of management that clarifies mutual expectations, emphasizes the support role of managers who are expected to act as coaches rather than judges, and focuses on the future. Performance management emerged in the latter half of 1980s partly due to the negative dimensions of merit rating, MBO, that is management by objectives, and performance appraisal. The development of performance management was accelerated by the emergence of human resource management, a realization that it was a concern for everyone, a shift from top-down to upward appraisal, dissatisfaction with performance-related pay and allied factors. Performance management is much more than performance appraisal schemes. It is an integrating process, a normal management process, a concern of all as partners, an agreed upon system, an issue of individuals as well as teams, a combination of inputs and outcomes, a continuous process, a joint process, an improvement orientation, a focus on self-managed learning and so on. As a natural process of management, it lays emphasis on analysis, measurement, monitoring performance and planning and coaching. It is concerned with the interrelated processes of work, management, development and reward. T.V. Rao, the father of Indian HRD, has identified some important points for performance appraisal and performance management. Let us take a look at those. Performance appraisal system. It focuses on relative evaluation of individuals. It is an annual exercise. It lays stress on rating and evaluation. Its integral components are rewards and recognition for effective performance. It is designed and monitored by the HR department and also owned by the HR department. It uses KPAs and KRAs simply to provide objectivity. It identifies development needs at the end of the year on the basis of the assessment of competency gap. It involves review mechanism to ensure objectivity in ratings. It is marked by a system with deadlines, meetings, input and output, and a format. It is format driven with a focus on the process. It is related to promotions, rewards, training and development, interventions and placements. Performance management system. It focuses on improving the performance of individuals, teams and organizations. It is a continuous process. It lays stress on performance planning, analysis, review, development and improvements. Its integral component is defining and setting performance standard, not necessarily performance rewarding. Although it is designed by the HR department, it can also be monitored by the respective department themselves. It is owned by the line managers. HR merely facilitates its implementation. It uses KPIs and KRAs as planning mechanisms. It identifies development needs at the very outset of the year on the basis of competency requirements for the coming year. It involves review mechanisms necessarily for improving performance. It is marked by a system with deadlines, meeting, input-output and a format. It is process-driven with a focus on the format as an aid. It is related to performance improvements and through them to other HR decisions. Alright, we will now quickly discuss the 4 goals of performance management. It seeks to achieve organizational, team and individual effectiveness. It seeks to develop employees. It involves core competencies of the organization and the capabilities of the individuals and teams. It seeks to satisfy the needs and expectations of different stakeholders, that is owners, management, employees, customers, suppliers and general public of the organization. This is done by treating employees as partners in the organization. It seeks to facilitate communication and involvement. It develops an organizational climate where managers and employees tend to openly discuss the organization's objectives, values and mission. This helps in accomplishing mutual understanding of what is to be achieved through development and management of people. Thus, performance management embraces the participation of people in defining their objectives and measures to attain them. Having understood what performance management is, let us move on to the factors that distort appraisals. Performance appraisals are subject to a wide variety of inaccuracies and biases referred to as rating errors. These errors occur in the rater's observations, judgment, and information processing and can seriously affect the assessment results. We will study the 14 factors that can distort the performance appraisal. Leniency or severity. Every evaluator has his own value system that acts as a standard against which appraisals are made. Relative to the true or actual performance an individual exhibits, some evaluators mark high while others mark low. The former is referred to as positive leniency error and the latter is referred to as negative leniency error. When evaluators are positively lenient in their appraisal, an individual's performance becomes overstated. In doing so, the performance is rated higher than it actually should be. Similarly, a negative leniency error understates performance, giving the individual a lower appraisal. If all individuals in an organization were appraised by the same person, there would be no problem. Any error factor would be applied equally to everyone. The difficulty arises when we have different evaluators with different leniency errors. For example, 2 people working under different supervisors but with exactly similar job performance would reflect differently in their appraisal results. Leniency or severity on the part of the rater makes the assessment subjective. Subjective assessment defeats the very purpose of performance appraisal. Ratings may be lenient due to certain reasons. The rater may feel that anyone under his jurisdiction who is rated unfavorably will reflect poorly on his or her own worthiness. He may feel that anyone who could have been rated unfavorably has already been discharged from the organization. He may feel that a derogatory rating will be revealed to the ratee and that may spoil relations between the rater and the ratee. He may rate leniently in order to win promotions for the subordinates and therefore indirectly increase his hold over them. He may feel it necessary to always approve of others in order to gain approval for himself. He may be operating on the premise, whoever associates with me is meritorious and therefore I am meritorious. He may rate leniently because there exists in the culture a response set to approve rather than disapprove. The next is bias. Bias is simply a personality based tendency either toward or against something. In the case of performance assessment, bias is toward or against an individual employee. All human beings have biases, but supervisors especially cannot afford to allow their biases to enter into their evaluation of subordinates in the firm. This is very easy to say, but very difficult to do. Biases make the evaluation process subjective rather than objective and certainly provide the opportunity for a lack of consistency in effect on different groups of employees. So, to overcome the bias problem, we need to be objective and not let our feelings of liking or disliking the individual influence our assessment. Next is halo error. This error occurs when the evaluator has a generally positive or negative impression of an individual and the evaluator then artificially extends that general impression to many individual categories of performance to create an overall evaluation of the individual that is either positive or negative. Negative halo error is sometimes called Horn's error. In other words, if employees are judged by their superior to be generally good employees and the supervisor then evaluates each of the areas of their performance as good, regardless of any behaviors or results to the contrary, the supervisor is guilty of halo error. A halo error takes place when one aspect of an individual's performance influences the evaluation of the entire performance of the individual, just as the assessment of performance of a student in his examination being influenced by the opening paragraph of every answer. In an organization, halo error occurs when an employee who works late constantly might be rated high on productivity and quality as well as on motivation. Similarly, an attractive or popular employee might be given a high overall rating. We can avoid halo error by remembering that employees are often strong in some areas and weaker in others, and we need to objectively evaluate individual employees based on their actual performance for each and every item of assessment. Rating employees separately in each of the number of performance measures and encouraging raters to guard against the halo effect are two ways to reduce the halo effect. Next is similarity error. This occurs when raters evaluate subordinates that they consider more similar to themselves as better employees and subordinates that they consider different from themselves as poor employees. The evaluators project self-perception onto others. We all have a tendency to feel more comfortable with people who we feel are more similar to ourselves. And if we are not careful, we can allow this feeling of comfort with similar individuals to be reflected in the performance appraisal process. For example, the evaluator who perceives himself as aggressive may evaluate others by looking for aggressiveness. Those who demonstrate this characteristic tend to benefit, and others who lack it are at a disadvantage. We can avoid similarity error by embracing diversity and by objectively evaluating individual employees based on their actual performance, even if they are different from us and don't do things the same way that we do. Next is primacy and recency error. The raters' ratings are heavily influenced by the behavior exhibited by the employee during the early stages of the review period, primacy, or by outcomes or behavior exhibited by the employee near the end of the review period, recency. Recency error occurs when raters use only the last few weeks or month of a rating period as evidence of their ratings of others. For instance, if a warehouse worker has been a strong performer for most of the appraisal period, but right before his annual evaluation, he knocks over a stack of high-cost electronic equipment while driving a forklift, he may be rated poorly due to recency error. We can avoid the recency error by evaluating the employee based on the entire assessment period, commonly 6 to 12 months. Using the critical incidence method really helps to recall and assess the entire period more objectively. One way of guarding against such an error is to ask the rater to consider the composite performance of the ratee and not be influenced by one incident or one achievement. Next is central tendency. Central tendency occurs when the rater refuses to use two extremes, for instance, outstanding and unacceptable respectively. Raters prone to the central tendency error continually rate all employees as average. For example, if a supervisor rates all employees as 3 on a scale of 1 to 5, no differentiation among the employees exists. Failure to rate the deserving employees as 5 or undeserving as 1, as the case warrants it, will only create problems, especially if this information is used for pay increases. Next is inappropriate substitutes for performance. It is difficult to find consensus on what is a good job, and it is even more difficult to produce agreement on what criteria determine performance. Hence, the appraisal frequently uses substitutes for performance criteria that supposedly closely approximate performance and act in its place. Many of these substitutes are well chosen and give a good approximation of the actual performance. However, the substitutes chosen are not always approximate. In some jobs, one or more of the selected criteria as substitutes are actually part of the performance. An appropriate substitute in one job may be totally inappropriate in another. Next is attribution error. In simplified terms, attribution is a process where an individual assumes reasons or motivations such as attitudes, values or beliefs for an observed behavior. So, attribution error in performance appraisal might occur when the rater observes an employee action, such as an argumentative answer to a question, and assumes that the individual has a negative attitude toward the job and is a poor performer. This may not be true, and in such a case, the rater would be guilty of an attribution error. We need to avoid attribution error because it is based on our subjective conclusion. When in doubt, we shouldn't assume we know why the employee did or didn't do something. We should talk to employees to find out so that we can objectively evaluate employees based on their actual performance. Next is stereotyping. Stereotyping is mentally classifying a person into an affinity group and then identifying the person as having the same assumed characteristics as the group. Making assumptions about individual employees' characteristics based on their supposed membership in a group rather than explicitly identifying the characteristics of the individuals creates the potential for significant error in evaluations. Next is proximity error. This error states that similar marks may be given to items that are near, proximate to each other on the performance appraisal form, regardless of differences in performance on those measures. We can avoid the proximity error by objectively evaluating employees' actual performance on each and every item on the assessment form. Next is contrast error. In contrast error, the rater compares and contrasts performance between two employees rather than using absolute measures of performance to measure each employee. For example, the rater may contrast a good performer with an outstanding performer, and as a result of the significant contrast, the good performer may seem to be below average. This would be a contrast error. We can avoid the contrast error by objectively evaluating individual employees based on their actual performance. We must use the ranking method correctly. First, we assess each individual based on the items on the assessment form. Then we rank the individuals based on their assessments. Next is poor appraisal form. Appraisal forms with vague and unclear rating scale, long and complex contents, irrelevant performance dimension and so on can also affect the appraisal process. Next is distributional error. These errors occur in three forms: severity or strictness, central tendency and leniency. They are based on a standard normal distribution or the bell curve that we are also familiar with. In severity or strictness error, the rater evaluates everyone or nearly everyone as below average. Central tendency error occurs when raters evaluate everyone under their control as average. Nobody is either really good or really bad. Finally, leniency error occurs when the rater evaluates all others as above average. Leniency error therefore is basically a form of grade inflation. We can avoid distributional errors by giving a range of evaluations. The distribution is often based on the ranking method of evaluation and forced distribution. Friends, the last one is culture factor. Culture has profound impact on the appraisal system, as the performance of the employee should be in sync with the organizational culture. Employee participation should be encouraged by the organization culture. Performance review systems imported from other organizations rarely function satisfactorily. This failure is due to the difference in the organization cultures. Hence, each organization is required to design the appraisal system according to their own organizational culture and needs. Alright, having studied these 14 different errors, you may be wondering, how do we avoid them? As we have seen, there are a significant number of ways that performance appraisals can fail to provide an accurate assessment of the capabilities and the behaviors of individual employees. So far, we have only looked at little things we can do to overcome these problems as individuals. How can a firm avoid these problems on an organization-wide basis throughout the performance appraisal process? There are a number of fairly simple steps that we can take within the organization to minimize the negative issues that occur in the performance appraisal process. All we have to do is look at the problems noted, and we can fairly quickly come up with some possible solutions to at least the majority of those problems using the same methods. Let's discuss how the firm can limit the potential for the appraisal process to go astray by developing accurate performance measures, training evaluators, and using multiple raters. Develop accurate performance measures. If the performance appraisal methods and forms are not accurate measures, the entire performance appraisal process will have problems. Therefore, the organization should have its own HR specialist or hire consultants to develop the assessment process and measures. There are three things HR specialists commonly do to help ensure accurate measures. Use multiple criteria. One method of overcoming some of the problems with the appraisal process is to ensure that we use more than one or two criteria to evaluate an individual's performance over time. We should generally have at least one evaluation criterion for each major function within an individual job. Behaviors and results that occur over the entire course of the evaluation period are typically the best criteria to use in the process of evaluating an individual's performance, but employees behave in many different ways in different circumstances throughout the course of a year. So, we shouldn't limit the appraisal process to one or two actions on the part of that individual employee. By evaluating multiple criteria, we have the ability to lower the incidence of halo, recency, contrast, and attribution errors, and may even be able to affect bias and stereotyping, because many criteria, not just one or two, are being analyzed. Minimize the use of trait-based evaluations. Our next method of overcoming problems within the appraisal process is to minimize the evaluation of individual traits. Trait-based evaluations tend to be more subjective than behavior or results-based evaluations, and as a result should generally not be used unless there is a specific reason why the particular trait must be exhibited in order to be successful in a job. Only when we have specific reason for trait-based evaluations should those traits be measured and evaluated in the appraisal process. In addition, because of their subjectivity, trait-based evaluations are much more difficult to defend in cases where the organization has used the evaluation process for later disciplinary action with an individual employee. By minimizing the evaluation of traits, we lower the incidence of bias, stereotyping, similarity error, and potentially attribution error. So, minimizing trait evaluations lowers the ability of the rater to make some of the most significant mistakes that can occur in the appraisal process. Train evaluators. Train evaluators to overcome the common problems of assessment. Simply through the process of training, many of the common problems are mitigated if not eliminated. Once evaluators become aware that the common errors occur with some regularity, they almost immediately begin to evaluate such errors and guard against them. Even the bias and stereotyping errors may be mitigated through the rater training process. Most of the employees want to do a good job, and once they know that an error is being committed, they will make attempts to correct that error. So, rater training provides them with knowledge of these errors and allows them the opportunity to correct them. Train evaluators to use the measurement methods and forms. Evaluators should also be trained to use the various performance assessment methods and forms. Because the critical incidence method is not commonly used as a formal assessment method, evaluators should be taught to use it to help overcome recency error. Evaluators need training to effectively use MBO, that is management by objectives, and to write a good narrative. When a rating scale is used, some training should be given to better understand the differences between the word descriptors along the continuum, that is excellent, good, and so on. Bars and ranking forms are fairly straightforward, but when they are used, some training can help overcome problems. Use multiple raters. The next tool to minimize errors in the evaluation process, at least in some cases, is to use multiple raters to evaluate an individual. This becomes expensive very quickly, so we must decide whether or not the value inherent in using multiple evaluators overcomes the cost of the process. If it does, using multiple evaluators can conquer some significant problems in the appraisal process. Multiple evaluators limit the ability of one individual appraiser to provide a biased opinion concerning an employee's performance, as well as limiting the ability for stereotyping in the appraisal process. In addition, halo, similarity, contrast, and attribution errors become less likely, and distributional errors tend to even out among multiple raters. It is for these reasons that 360-degree evaluations have gained favor in many organizations over the past 20 years. 360-degree appraisals. An appraisal device that seeks performance feedback from such sources as the person being rated, bosses, peers, team members, customers, and suppliers has become popular in organizations. It is also called as 360-degree appraisal. Provide ongoing feedback. The evaluators can frequently discuss with the employee both the expectations and the disappointments. Providing the employee with repeated opportunities to discuss performance before any reward or punishment will eliminate surprises at the formal annual review. Use peer evaluations. Supervisors find it difficult to evaluate their employees' performance because they are not observing them at every moment of the workday. Peer evaluations are conducted by the employee's co-workers, that is, people explicitly familiar with the behaviors involved in their jobs. The tendency for co-workers to offer more constructive insight to each other so that as a unit each will improve is the main advantage of peer evaluations. Friends, we have thus come to the end of this session. I am sure you have enjoyed studying the 14 different factors that distort appraisal. Have a good day ahead. Thank you.